When I was in college here as an undergraduate in the late 80s and early 90s, for me the arts were something that was a little bit remote, that I was much more an appreciator, an audience member, a supporter of my friends who did the arts much more fully than someone who was a creative person myself. And so I went to tons of concerts and lots of theater and dance performances and so forth, and I always loved the arts, and I was always in awe, frankly, of my classmates, my roommates, my peers who were so creative and so talented in so many different ways. As I got older and in my sort of latest iteration at Harvard as a faculty member, I've become much more centrally involved in the arts, much more fully engaged in creative processes and trying to program around the arts and in trying to inspire my students to think of art as one place where they can do their intellectual work, where they can do their political work, where they can do work of personal exploration. And so for me, it's really been, my relationship with the arts has evolved over time from someone who is more of a witness or a spectator to someone who's now much more of a creative participant and an engaged force in the arts here at Harvard.
That's great. Can you talk a little bit about your work with the Carr Center and American Repertory Theater?
Yeah. So I've been more and more involved with the American Repertory Theater in the last 4 or 5 years, and in 2014, the American Repertory Theater, the ART, started a collaboration, an ongoing collaboration with the Carr Center for Human Rights Policy at the Kennedy School, where I'm a core faculty member and a program director. And we launched this series called the ART, or the Art of Human Rights. And it's a series that brings together academics and artists and activists to, in a set of ongoing conversations, public conversations that are free and open to the public, not just Harvard people, but people from all over the Boston metro area, to have conversations about the role that art plays in politics, in democratic discourses and debates, in representing and engaging and interrogating and illuminating some of the most pressing human rights issues of our time. And so we've had each year about 6 to 10, depending on the year, programs where we bring together lots of different kinds of people to talk about things like the legacies of slavery and modern day slavery, to talk about things like religion and sexuality and gender identity in Uganda, to talk about issues of civil rights and racial justice and mass incarceration here in the United States, issues of state surveillance and the assault on civil liberties. This coming fall we're going to be doing a reading of Robert Schenken's new play, Building the Wall, which is a kind of futuristic, dystopian one-act play about about the age of Trump. We did an event with Robert Schenken and Lonnie Guinier and others around the play All the Way, which was a dramatic theater piece that won the Tony and the Pulitzer on Lyndon Johnson's presidency, the early part of his presidency, and his relationship with the civil rights movement. So we've done a whole host of programming around these pressing issues of human rights, looking at the intersection of art and politics, and it's been a wonderful, wonderful collaboration. I also work with the American Repertory Theater in several other contexts. I'm a member of the Board of Advisors for the ART. I've hosted a number of roundtable discussions and creative workshops where we've been developing new art and new theater and new performance pieces, usually having something to do with politics. I mean, my work as a cultural historian, as a teacher, scholar, and activist is really concerned about how art and culture and history serve as locations for us to think about our political lives, our political divisions, our political debates and challenges and crises, and how culture and art and history are ways for us to explore and to explode sometimes issues that are tough to talk about and tough to represent, human experiences of suffering, of struggle, of democracy, of oppression. These are things that I'm very, very concerned with in my own scholarship and teaching, but also as an activist, and now more and more as a creative person too.
Oh, that was great. That was really great. That's super interesting.
Thanks.
What's an event like how is an event like Question Create important to the alumni arts community?
Yeah. Well, I think we're living in a moment right now that is exciting for the arts. The arts are vital in times of contention and division and crisis. And you see it you see an outpouring of artistic activity right now. Television, for instance, I don't think has ever been better in the United States, at least. When you think about the kinds of theater that's being done right now to engage all sorts of pressing issues about identity and democracy and so forth. We're seeing stunning works of art that are being created, movement pieces, visual artists who are taking on major challenges in our broad culture. The arts are vital, and it's really important to have a space in this community here at Harvard and well beyond to come together to think about what role art plays in this moment. And we have, almost an unlimited pool of talented alums and folks who are here at Harvard too, who are doing this work all over the country and all over the world. And it's just an exciting opportunity to think about the idea of many of us coming back to Harvard, a place where many of us got our start here, where that kind of artistic creativity was first incubated and inspired, where it's housed for some of us and where it's challenged, to come together as a community of artists and creators and intellectuals and folks who are doing this work, to both share the work that we do, but also to engage in kind of critical questioning about the work that we do, and to come together and have those debates and have those pose those questions and really get after it across genre and media and maybe intellectual ideological background, identity experiences, and I'm thrilled about the diversity of the program, the range of things that are going to be offered. This is the first time the Harvard Alumni Association has hosted an event like this, and I hope it will be the first of many, many more. Certainly we're not going to solve everything in the course of a weekend, but I certainly think we can get the ball rolling and come together and start to forge a community around art making, around creativity, and around critical engagement in cultural work that can hopefully have an impact not just on us as a community and this institution as a university, but the world at large, because the world needs art right now and it needs artists, and this is an opportunity for us to participate in that democratic calling as global citizens in a tough time.
So last question, can you share an example of either a project or initiative or a class that showcases how the arts have a really far-reaching impact?
Yeah. So I'll talk about two educational contexts that I've been involved in that I think show how classroom spaces, when they intersect with artistic creativity, can have a broader impact. The first example is a course that I designed a couple of years ago and taught a couple of years ago here at Harvard around the Harvard Civil War Project, the 150th anniversary of the American Civil War, and there are a whole series of programs and conferences and performances and so forth that were taking place during that time to commemorate and interrogate the 150-year anniversary of the Civil War and the legacies that of the Civil War that certainly endure and that are real for us. And so one of the things that I did was to create this class called Staging the Civil War, from the archive to the ART. And it was a course that was a partnership between the History and Literature program, the undergraduate honors program, which is one place I teach, with the American Repertory Theater here in Cambridge, and also with the Schlesinger Library at Radcliffe. And this was an opportunity for 22 students to come together to be involved in the archives and also be involved in master classes with artists that were working through the ART, including Matt Aucoin, the composer, the brilliant playwright Susan Laurie Parks, and a whole host of other folks who were doing work around Civil War themes at the ART that year. And so the students would toggle back and forth between the archives, where they were going through primary documents from the Civil War era, and the ART, where they were meeting in workshops with some of the great artists of our time who were trying to create works of art that represent the history that they were studying in the archives themselves. And one of the things that happened over the course of this term, where we spent half of our time in the archive and half of our time on the stage, where students would take the archival materials that they were discovering and talking about in class, and they were using those to create works of art. They created one-act plays, dramatic monologues and dialogues, movement pieces. Several of the pieces involved music, original music that the students wrote and performed. And at the end of the term, we had a kind of a showcase where the students all performed their final projects rather than writing them and submitting a term paper. And this is a class that has inspired, I mean, I know that several of the students have gone on to work in the theater and to work in the arts, and who have written plays, who have actually staged plays. Kimiko Matsuda Lawrence, who's one of the student organizers, or the alumni organizers of this gathering that we're having in September, was a student of mine and was in that class. And she was an incredible force intellectually, creatively, politically on campus. And she was just one of many students that were able to use this class and other classes like it to integrate what they were doing intellectually and artistically and politically. And so this was, of course, first of its kind, certainly that I've taught, that helped students do that. And so it had that impact. The second example I would give is something that I've done through the American Repertory Theater. The American Repertory Theater is committed to not only expanding the boundaries of theater, but also engaging in the communities in and around Cambridge and Boston and beyond. And one way that they do that is they host this thing called the Proclamation Project, which is, I think, an 8 to 10 week after-school theater program for local high school students. And so 15 or so or 20 students come from various high schools from across the Boston metro area, and they basically come together to produce, over the course of 8 to 10 weeks in the afternoons, a theater piece that's original, that they conceive and direct and produce and act in and stage and everything else. And one year, a couple of years ago, they decided that the theme of the Proclamation Project, because every year it has a theme, was going to be radicals or dissenters or people who disrupt the status quo. And they used one of my books, which is called The Radical Reader, a documentary history of American radicalism. It's the first book that I published in 2003, as the text for the course. And so the students were reading various primary documents, and they came up with a theater piece called Occupy Oberon, where it was an environmental and social justice themed theater piece, where they literally took over Oberon, which is the ART second stage theater in Cambridge, and they did this kind of radical political piece that was inspired in part by the Occupy movement, but also by Henry David Thoreau and Emma Goldman and other kinds of radicals, Walt Whitman from the past, that they'd been reading in the seminar. And I worked very closely with them as a kind of academic advisor throughout that program, and it was just wonderful to see, you know, texts from a book that I had published early on in my career taking on this whole new life through the imagination and the activism and the bravery and talent of these amazing students. And so they did a 2-day weekend set of performances of Occupy Oberon, and I was there for all of them, and it was just remarkable. And they were sold out every night, and it was one of these things where this little book that I had put together as a graduate student early on in my academic career was now something that had a life and had this other life and iteration. And that's one of the things that art can do. It can take old things and make them new and exciting, and it's also something that is collaborative, right? That this is something that could only have been done in a setting where lots of different people with different talents and different perspectives and different identities come together to create something out of something that was not that in the first place, but that could give a certain little bit or spark of inspiration to create something so much more inspiring.